Arranging to meet with the Emergol conglomerate's president was a surprisingly difficult endeavor. I'm honestly not sure what I had been expecting when Salkim first promised to put together a parley with Jexal, but the veritable Gordian knot's worth of red tape far surpassed even my most pessimistic predictions. However, after signing enough legal forms to give myself carpal tunnel, I was eventually cleared by the embassy to visit Gemstone Hollow, Emergol's capital city. "Please be careful," requested Vavi, interlocking her claws with my fingers as we stood at the base of Salkim's jet. Apparently, the paperwork and waiting periods required for she or the Prime Minister to accompany me were far too extensive given our time constraints. As such, I would be boarding the aircraft alone. "Relax," I smiled at her, carefully tugging free my dominant hand and with it brushing aside Vavi's head feathers. "I'm meeting with a politician, not going to war." "Not yet," Vavi added, her tone's bitterness underscoring the dangerous implications of our desperately cobbled-together plan. Having already sworn to assist us in taking down Providence once and for all, the Emergol conglomerate was for the time being an ally of Zintril. That being said, persuading them to take an even greater risk in manufacturing fighters for a battle against the Irigan Empire would almost assuredly require significant negotiation on my part. I could only hope Jexal would be willing to see reason. Gently pulling Vavi in for a light embrace and holding for a few seconds in her arms, I kissed my alien lover goodbye, and on that sappy note made my way up the stairs to Salkim's aircraft for the long flight to Gemstone Hollow. Under most circumstances, I'd probably have sought out some form of entertainment to keep me busy during the lonely 11-hour flight. The plane's cabin came equipped with its own television, supplemented by row upon row of movie tapes organized by title in the cabinet beside it. I, however, was in no mood for such distractions, remaining instead at the window seat as I looked out over the clouds below and contemplated my next steps. Emergol was first united under corporate rule roughly half a century prior to my arrival, following a long and bloody civil war the likes of which neither side came out on top. Ultimately, it was the defense company who sold weapons to the warring factions that ended up as the country's default ruler. Once in control of the area, they branched out into the production of all manner of industrial products. Over 90% of the country's population worked directly for the conglomerate, with the remainder working for small farms or as the occasional independent contractor. The country wasn't merely run like a business, it was a business. As such, it came as no surprise to me that they were the largest economic power on Arquisa. Having watched a 3-hour documentary on the conglomerate's history, I understood fairly well how their government functioned. Much like how nations on Earth have departments specializing in different fields, the conglomerate has subsidiary companies, each specializing in a different industry. Jexal was the third president of this corporate nation, and from day one he made his motives clear. Profit was the #1 factor in Emergol's foreign policy, and their new president took this to heart when Providence approached his business to buy weapons from them. In many ways, it was his fault the situation grew to its current catastrophic proportions. Without Emergol weapons, Providence would have been defeated long ago. Now was not the time to be pointing fingers, however. Ultimately, the question of who caused the problem was immaterial to rectifying it. With Providence's defeat close on the horizon, the nations of Arquisa would soon be open to dealing with the Irigan issue. With any luck, Emergol production would be up to the task of building a fleet to distract the Irigan whilst me and my forces crept aboard Finality to take it over. It was aboard this aircraft that my recent lack of restful sleep would catch up to me, weighing down my eyelids and lulling me into comfortable darkness. My dream that night was strangely detailed. In it, we had succeeded in taking Finality and handing it over to Baoth, who then forced the Irigan fleet to fall back. After that, however, something strange and terrible occurred. No sooner had the Irigan left the galactic stage than did another species arise to take their place. Humanity, and myself by extension, was powerless to stop them as they enslaved the populations of Earth and Arquisa. Normally, I found the dialogue of dreams to be relatively inconsequential, but nevertheless I could recall rather vividly what Baoth said when humanity then approached him in a desperate scramble for aid. "I'm terribly sorry, but we in the Irigan Empire do not intervene in the matters of lesser species. You have every right to defend yourselves against these people's attack. However, they in turn have every right to annihilate you. Before awakening to the jolt of Salkim's jet touching town, I saw for the briefest moment an image of Earth being held at laser point as another larger Dyson sphere slowly charged up to render upon my home planet the final blow. Shaking off the phantasm's lingering impact, I quickly rose to my feet as a pair of armed soldiers stepped aboard the vessel and gestured for me to follow them. Seeing little reason to be contrarian here, I quickly complied with their orders and allowed these soldiers to guide me down the landing ramp. Just up ahead from where Salkim's aircraft had landed was a massive building that resembled some combination of a corporate office and a palace. This was where the conglomerate's president awaited me. Deeply imbibing a lungful of smog-filled air, I followed along with my armed chaperones as we entered into a comically opulent garden leading up to the front entrance. Elegantly trimmed hedges and statues wrought from gold looked upon me with curiosity as I stepped into the corporate lobby to there await my meeting with Jexol. Looking out the elevator's wall of presumably tinted glass, I watched as the cityscape's finer details faded from view to leave behind in their place a vague metropolitan mosaic. Jexol's corporate tower was built into a nearby cliff, allowing it to rise far higher than any of the city's other skyscrapers. Arkisa's lower gravity was in itself sufficient to allow for taller towers, but even still this place seemed to take that to an absurd degree. When at last the doors behind us slid open, I was quickly shepherded by the guards and brought forth down an opulently decorated hall toward the office of Jexol. Elegant busts of the previous two company presidents stood watch on either side of the large double doors, glaring down upon me with timeless contempt as the guards guiding me stepped forth to insert their keys. Only once both of the locks were twisted open did the doors finally follow suit, opening up to unveil what looked less akin to an office and more so a luxury apartment, complete with a balcony and its own artificial hot spring decorated to look like the real thing. The guards did not follow as I stepped inside the office, tugging awkwardly at my collar as wisps of steam brought beads of sweat down my neck. Anxiously glancing about the area in search of the company president, I eventually found him lounging beside a fireplace. "Human, I've been waiting," he began, imbibing a deep sip of some alcoholic beverage before gesturing for me to join him on a leather cushion beside his own. "I do believe we have much to discuss." "Actually, I think it's a rather manageable amount," I shrugged, stepping forth to ease myself down beside the company president. "Once Providence is dealt with, we'll need your nation's industrial capacity to build a distraction fleet." "Yes, that," Jexol hummed, pressing a button beside his seat as above us a string of blue lights like those on a Christmas tree flashed to life, and another Koffel who looked to be some manner of servant entered the room carrying two massive platters of food. "Before we begin on such a note, perhaps you would do me the service of some more casual conversation over a meal?" Somehow I got the feeling this was a trap. "I didn't come here to discuss the weather, Jexol," I replied, doing my best to maintain an air of confidence despite the building anxiety within. "We have vital matters to discuss and very little time to waste." "Straight to business, I see. Respectable," concluded Jexol, impaling a cutlet of meat upon his claws and daintily drawing it into his mouth. Graciously, the company president waited until he had finished chewing before again piping up. "Nevertheless, I do like to know my business partners before I engage in risky ventures, and challenging an alien empire for continued dominion over Arkisa is most certainly a high-stakes investment," he hummed, washing down the cutlet's taste with a light sip of his beverage. Clearly, the company president didn't understand what was on the line here. "Your other option is surrendering to them, so unless you're interested in being a vassal to the Iragan, you'll help us." "Like I said, risky business," continued Jexol, setting down his newly emptied glass before turning his full attention towards our conversation. "I can understand the necessity, you see, but the board is not so reasonable. Perhaps we can help each other." Again, I didn't like where he was going with this, but my options were unfortunately limited. "Maybe we can. What exact is it you want?" "I must confess, human, I am in no small amount of political peril here. Profits are high as ever, but the board demands growth. If I cannot satisfy their greed, I'm out of business." "Unfortunate for you, but I don't really see how I can be of assistance there." I shrugged, not yet understanding the president's plan. Clicking his throat with amusement upon my evident ignorance, Jexall replied, "If I cut employee wages again, they'll surely riot. That being said, our industrial production is already at its peak safe capacity, and I can think of no better solution to tide over my own employers." "Go on, then. Tell me your plan." "Your people have mastered thinking computers, have they not?" Jexall asked, shaking his head to indicate a question. Still unable to see through his opaque intentions, I decided it best not to give a concrete answer. "And what if we have?" "I like to think of myself as a smart man, human, but even my business acumen has limits. An artificial intelligence, however, could manage the conglomerate far better than a mere coffle. I've set aside resources to build myself an artificial financial advisor to help maximize profits. All you have to do is lend my people access to your computational technology. Guarantee me that, and you will in turn have conglomerate assistance against the Iragon." If I'm honest, I was expecting him to ask for something significantly worse than just helping to build an artificial intelligence. Even still, however, I could hardly help but doubt the president's intentions. Corporate executives weren't exactly renowned for their honesty back home, and I doubted things to be any different here on Arkisa. Nevertheless, my options weren't exactly extensive here. "Let's say I do agree to this," I supposed hypothetically, cupping my chin ponderously as I contemplated how best to navigate Jexall's deal. "How many ships can you have built in 5 months?" "At least a few hundred," the president hummed, setting aside his food before leaning forth to eye me more directly. "If your plan is to distract them, then you should know we in the Emergol conglomerate also have the finest war strategists at our disposal. They can work with Zintral's military to concoct a plan to keep an invading armada busy for a little while. The only question now to ask is, do we have a deal?" Setting aside my reasonable reluctance rega this plan, I did my best to maintain a look of neutrality as I reached out my hand to the Kafel, gesturing for him to grab it. As he did so, I shook my grasp gently up and down in the classic human gesture of a pact newly forged. "Deal,"